Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation has been in existence 54 years. We are community-based, and our mission is to preserve, protect, and promote Chinatown as a viable ethnic, residential, and business community. The type of work that we do spans a very broad spectrum, which you can see here on the slide. But I will tell you, I'll summarize for you, is that whether you're a native-born, you're an immigrant to this country, whether you're a worker or small business owner, we are here to provide you with empowerment, economic empowerment, cultural empowerment, and educational empowerment. And this is, the forum today is also empowering you to understand what your rights are and what it means to be a victim of anti-hate. So with that, what I would like to do is introduce you to my co-host, Anna Pern, who is a fantastic organizer, community advocate, and has been a huge advocate behind the issue of anti-Asian hate. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Anna.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate you being our MC for today and bringing all these diverse voices together. This is our second community meeting on anti-Asian hate and violence. And we are hosting this meeting because residents from our first meeting had questions around hate crimes, the intersection with disability and mental health. And residents wanted to know more about what resources and more about their rights. So before we begin, the slide that you see that John has up is, some context for where we are today in this moment. Over 6 million Americans have been infected by COVID-19. We have 188,589 Americans who have died due to COVID-19. 40% of people who died were people with disabilities and seniors living in long-term care facilities. And then we have had Latino and African American residents of the United States who have been 3 times as likely to become infected as white neighbors. In Arizona and counties across the United States, Native Americans were also more likely to be infected as white neighbors. Asian residents were 1.3 times as likely as their white neighbors to become infected. And so when we talk about how COVID-19 has exposed a lot of the racial disparities in our country, I feel like it's important to provide that context about how this pandemic has impacted people differently. And unfortunately, we have a president of the United States who has laid the blame for COVID-19 on the Chinese, calling COVID-19 novel coronavirus Chinese virus. So Stop AAPI Hate received 2,583 reports of anti-Asian discrimination nationwide over the past 5 months. That's an astronomical number. And what we know here locally is that people are hesitant to even talk about or report the anti-Asian hate that they are experiencing. And so we felt like it was important to discuss that. And we wanted to show a short public service announcement that 6 ABC News had created about speaking out against hate. And so, John, if you could click on that link that's at the bottom there, we could show the PSA. It's a 30-second PSA. Thank you. Oh, and we have to unmute. Click not now. There we go.
This is America. We are better. 2-month pregnant mom punched in the face. Water thrown on a 12-year-old girl. A man beaten up, his collarbone broken. Asian Americans are under attack, being erroneously blamed and scapegoated for the coronavirus. This is America. We are better than this. We cannot stay silent. Join us. Join us. Join us. Join us. Speak out against racism.
So, we wanted to show that at this point, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are under attack. We have every day, a president who uses his national platform to message and to blame us for the deaths, the high rates of unemployment across the country, and for his mishandling of the pandemic. And John, if you could tab to the next slide. At the same time, we also have another crisis going on in our country, and it's one that's important to acknowledge. As we have seen recently, even this morning, I woke up, there was a new hashtag of an African American person who was killed by police who had a mental health disability. And so there are discussions right now about Black Lives Matter, about criminal justice reform in general that is needed. Black Americans account for less than 13% of the US population, but they are shot and killed at a rate by police that's more than twice as high as white Americans. And so, John, if you could go to the previous slide, we just wanted to show a quick link from a speech made by Doc Rivers, who was a basketball coach who is the son of a police officer, and he talks about his perspective.
As far as the other situation, it's just so sad. What stands out to me is just watching the Republican convention and this spewing this fear, right? Like all you hear is Donald Trump and all of them talking about fear. We're the ones getting killed. We're the ones getting shot. We're the ones that were denied to live in certain communities. We've been hung, we've been shot, and all you do is keep hearing about fear. It's amazing why we keep loving this country, and this country does not love us back. It's really so sad. Like I should just be a coach. And it's so often reminded of my color. It's just really sad. We gotta do better. But we gotta demand better. Like it's funny. We protest and they send riot guards, right? They send people with riot outfits. They go to Michigan with guns and are spitting on cops, and nothing happens. The training has to change in the police force. The unions have to be taken down in the police force. My dad was a cop. I believe in good cops. We're not trying to defund the police and take all their money away. We're trying to get them to protect us, just like they protect everybody else. I didn't want to talk about it before the game because it's so hard. Like to just keep watching it. That video, if you watch that video, you don't need to be black to be outraged. You need to be American and outraged. And how dare the Republicans talk about fear? We're the ones that need to be scared. We're the ones having to talk to every black child. What white father has to give his son a talk about being careful if you get pulled over? It's just ridiculous. And it just keeps going. There's no charges. Breonna Taylor, no charges, nothing. All we're asking is you live up to the Constitution. That's all we're asking for everybody, for everyone. Thank you.
All right, thanks, John. You can stop the video. So we wanted to show that video because there's a discussion right now about, wanting equal treatment under the law. And unfortunately, as with Black Americans, Asian Americans have had a difficult relationship with law enforcement. Southeast Asians, in particular, have been racially profiled and experienced higher rates of mass incarceration, especially during the prison boom in the 1990s. And so, what we want to do today is to acknowledge that, to acknowledge the challenges that we are having, but to also point out that the Asian American Pacific Islander community is not a monolith, that our interactions with law enforcement are different for different members of our community. And what we don't want to do is to perpetuate a model minority myth, which drives a wedge between Asian Americans and members of other races, including the Black community, nor within the AAPI community. And so, John, if you could go to the next slide. What we want to talk about today is, I see my friend Hassan is here joining us. Thank you, Hassan. But, essentially something that a friend of mine had said is we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And that was said by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In his speech, Why We Can't Wait. So with that said, I wanted to introduce Rob Busher and Cliff Akiyama, who are going to talk a little bit about the context for anti-Asian hate and why we have these hate crime statutes. Cliff and Rob.
Thanks, Anna. Great, Rob. Well, Cliff, I know you have to jump off in a little bit, so maybe you can start us off here.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So anyway, hi, everybody. My name is Cliff Akiyama, and I'm the former chapter president of the Japanese American Citizens League, but I have many roles. As a commissioner on the Mayor's Commission on Asian American Affairs, but by academic training, I'm a criminologist as well as a victimologist, and I really wanted to focus on, at least, this morning, on sort of the victimology of hate, and really focus on the primary goals of, like the perpetrator, as well as, the needs of sort of victims of hate crimes. And so often, prior to this, I was a Los Angeles County deputy sheriff, and have interviewed, dealt with many survivors of crimes, even in my role now as a behavior specialist, dealing with a lot of folks as, survivors of trauma. And, so often I see the pain, I see the hurt, I see the traumatization, of hate. And, whether I'm in court or whether I'm out on the street, so often I'm asked about, what are the goals, the perpetrator, and, why did this happen to me? And, so very often that's what I'm asked. And, the needs of the victim, of hate crime is that first and foremost that they need to feel that people care, and primarily that it's not their fault. Second, that, victims of hate crimes need to receive assistance. And it's just so great that we're having this forum once again, because really, it sends a huge message to any survivor of a crime that we care, and we as the Asian American community care, because so often as a community, as a city, as a nation, whenever we hear someone who is the victim of any crime, whether it be a hate crime or regular crime, first thing is to say that there's a victim blaming, right? And so, so then third is that, to receive, the victim needs to receive, reassurance that the community and law enforcement is as outraged by the crime as a victim, and regard these types, like hate crimes, as serious violations of the law. And, what are the effects of hate crimes on the victims? 100%. first and foremost is anxiety and PTSD. And if you present with, depression, with, any of these mental health issues as it is, this just triggers it. But first and foremost, PTSD, anxiety, there's fear, there's a sense of terror, and fourth, that there's a sense of really like a violation as well as degradation. And, so that's why I really and strongly, admire Anna for setting this up, because really, we need to be there for the victim and advocate for them. So, Rob.
Thank you, Cliff. Thanks. That was really good in terms of laying the groundwork of what a victim needs in a case like this. I'm going to talk a little bit more about anti-Asian racism in general and sort of give a historical context for some of the immigrant scapegoating that we're seeing right now with COVID. So, when we think about anti-Asian racism, it really can't exist without anti-Blackness, right? And it's this sort of framework of white supremacy where non-white peoples are given this sort of arbitrary hierarchy. But again, it only can exist because of the anti-Blackness in our society, and it's important to kind of keep that in mind and understand our positionality within this sort of racial triangulation of white, Black, and other, and Asian Americans very much being in this sort of other category. A lot of times, non-white, non-Black peoples are used to drive a wedge between the Black community and the white community. And in this particular case, I think we see that happening a little bit in some of the rhetoric that has surrounded recent allegations related to the hate incidents that we've been seeing here in Philadelphia. But more importantly, I think it also reminds us of some of the historic incidences of immigrant scapegoating, particularly for Asian immigrants. As early as the 1850s, we see Chinese miners and later railroad workers who are being scapegoated for the decline in white immigrant and white nativist wages, wage stagnation, and the unwillingness for the labor bosses to really pay the workers what they deserve, instead was being blamed on the Chinese immigrants. And so this results in a lot of anti-Chinese violence that ends up in riots in Los Angeles, mass lynchings in Denver and Rock Springs, Wyoming, and ultimately the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882. In terms of disease in particular, there were a lot of disease pandemics that took place in the late 1800s, early 1900s, such as a bubonic plague scare in Honolulu. The Chinatown was burnt to the ground, even though not a single Chinese person was found to have the plague. This was the kind of reasoning behind this. It's a racialized idea that somehow the Chinese were more susceptible to disease. On the mainland in California, Chinese and Japanese immigrants were forbidden from taking public transportation of any kind and were not allowed to cross state boundaries without a public health certificate indicating that they were free of the plague. So this is far from the first time that Chinese and Asian immigrants in general have been blamed for spreading disease. We see also many times in our history Asian Americans being blamed for economic success and in some cases economic ruin of other classes of people, particularly Japanese immigrant farmers working in California and elsewhere on the West Coast were begrudged their success. There was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment that also led to anti-Japanese immigration laws being passed, and ultimately a large contributing factor to the World War II mass incarceration and forced removal of Japanese Americans was because of the economic case for taking the land and taking the successful farms from Japanese immigrants and giving it to white laborers. This kind of continued in the 1970s and 80s as we see the decline of manufacturing. The import of Japanese autos and other consumer electronics leads to this sort of anti-Japanese Japan bashing within political rhetoric, within news media, that ultimately creates a climate of fear, hate, and violence. The most high-profile case was the murder of Vincent Chin, who was bludgeoned to death with a baseball bat in a parking lot by two unemployed auto workers in Detroit in 1984. So we see instances like this throughout our history. I think most recently, of course, we can look at 9/11, the September 11th terrorist attacks, and the sort of scapegoating that our Muslim American community saw. the extreme rise in Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate, but also of individuals who are perceived to be Muslim. People who practice the Sikh religion, or other South Asian Americans who are misinterpreted as being Muslim, are also victimized by hate. We've seen a number of those hate incidences, including violent hate crimes that have transpired here in Philadelphia. One such incident was the vandalization of the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Northeast Philadelphia in 2015, shortly after candidate Trump announced his plans for a Muslim travel ban. So we kind of see it's not just East Asians, nor is it just Asian Americans. Central and South Americans have been victimized by this kind of anti-immigrant rhetoric, the fear-mongering around immigration in general, and yet also are being blamed for wage stagnation and joblessness by white working classes. It's a difficult and dangerous situation. Unfortunately, I think this is not the last time that we will see the Chinese or Asian American community in general being scapegoated in this manner. But I do think that we can learn from our history, and if we can understand in the past and the strategies that we've used collectively to overcome this, particularly by building bridges between other communities of color as well as law enforcement and the general public, I believe that we can see ourselves through these incidences of hate and hopefully create a stronger and safer community for ourselves here in Philadelphia.
Thank you so much, Rob. And I know that Andy Toy wanted to provide a comment, in response to your presentation. Andy?
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Rob, for the perspective. I just wanted to throw in my perspective as a third-generation Chinese American. American is an important part of that because, growing up, I'm a little bit older, and throughout my life, people ask me, what language do you speak? Where are you from? The othering of Asian Americans is really an important point to make because, especially today with the China virus and all that being propagated by the president, that when there are issues that are raised against Asian Americans, I think it's so important that we call them out because we're seen as other all the time, even today, even as a third generation Chinese American. And we have other crimes that we see, and we need to support our other brothers and sisters in other communities, like the recent incident a couple weeks ago about a trans woman that was attacked for being trans. And we know that's a hate crime, and we need to call that out, and we need to support that. But we also need to show that when things happen in our community that we're willing to stand up for ourselves, and others are willing to help stand up for us as well, our allies across the board. I just remember, the history of Philadelphia is not, we have issues as well. Around 30 years ago, a young man named Hang Lim, Cambodian American, was murdered because of his race. And because he got into an argument, and it's not that far from the surface, unfortunately. And we can't let these things go without calling them out. So I'll just say also in terms of my advocacy. At one point, there was no statute for hate crimes, but we all know that hate is a much deeper and more destructive element of our society. Racial animus versus like a person being punched on the street. In fact, I would say if we were to pick a crime to be spoken out against, it would be ethnic intimidation versus whatever it was, an attack, because that tells society that this is a critical issue for all of us to be aware of and to stand up against. And when the hate crimes bill in Pennsylvania was first passed, I was a big supporter of that. And it was not really about the Asian American community, it was about the Black community being attacked. And And we had to stand up for that. And I'm glad we passed it. And there is a reason why it is an additional crime, because it is vital to the structure of our society that we don't let these things happen. We don't want to have a Nazi Germany where people are attacked just because of their religious beliefs or their racial background or their sexual status or whatever. So I think when we have allies out there, I would just say that we know our allies, and we need to be working together and communicating and knowing that we have friends that will support us. We shouldn't be afraid to call it for what it is.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. This is Chad. Sorry that I'm late. I just got on, but I want to thank Anna and I want to thank Rue. And once again, I'm humbled and honored to be here this morning. Sorry for the delay.
No, Chad, thank you. I mean, we've heard from folks that they had trouble signing in, so I apologize for the technical issues, but this is a perfect segue, following Rob and Andy, providing a context for why we have these hate crime laws and ethnic intimidation statutes. So we're really honored here to have Chad Lassiter. He is the executive director for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We are also joined here by Carl Summerson. And so today they are going to provide us with a quick explainer for what is ethnic intimidation, what are hate crimes. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chad.
Thank you so much. And Carl will go into greater details around the latter. I just wanted to set some just very brief context. I also wanted to extend an apology to those who may have been offended by my comments in the Philadelphia Inquirer, in which through my professional lens and my expertise, I actually saw this as ethnic intimidation. And the reason why I'm extending an apology is because I never come into any space trying to be divisive, combative, or anything of that nature. But I have received some emails from those who may have been kind of unnerved by it. But I echo the same sentiments as Andy Toy. For me, growing up in the city.
Oh, we have lost Chad.
I think we lost Chad.
I know. Okay, so we'll wait a second for Chad to rejoin. Carl, did you want to just pick up from Chad's remarks?
Absolutely, I can.
Thank you.
About his issue with the paper, I don't have a comment about that, but I do have a lot of comments about ethnic intimidation. 1982, that was made a crime here in Pennsylvania, and to commit it, you have to commit certain acts of crime, and they're either crimes against persons or property. And then there's a limitation on who can be victimized: race, color, religion, or national origin. Back in 2002, they tried to add some, but that fell short, and they're trying to do that again until they do the categories are race, color, religion, or national origin. Now, I've heard some things about issues when people are assaulted. It's very easy to see that that is an underlying offense to which you can add ethnic intimidation. But it's not so easy when someone just talks to somebody or shouts at somebody or issues epithets at somebody. To me, they're fighting words. In the law, there's a concept that when you are face to face with someone and yell things at them that annoy them and alarm them, that's harassment. And all you have to do is do it twice, and that's a course of action. I think people, I don't know why they don't want to deal with that, but I will say to you that I personally know that that is a crime of harassment. When someone comes up to someone on the street, starts berating them, it makes them feel terrible. It attacks them, their self-image, their personhood even, and that should be addressed by the law. When it doesn't, someone can go to the district justice and seek a private criminal complaint if the police aren't kind of moving on that. But more importantly than that, guess what? The law has also provided civil remedies for those individuals victimized by crime of hate. And those are pretty significant. Mental anguish, I'm going to tell you, people that are victimized by this stuff are in mental anguish. They can recover damages for that, and who knows how much that is. They can recover punitive damages designed to hurt the perpetrator financially. They can also recover, guess what? Attorney fees. You can't find attorneys for everything, but you can for this, which is really a significant feature of ethnic intimidation. A lot of people don't know about those civil remedies, so they have that opportunity to do that. But just to return again to this idea of words alone, the courts have said over and over, can constitute the crime of harassment. Harassment is indeed an underlying offense to which you can add the hate crime of ethnic intimidation. I only had a couple of minutes. I really put a lot together there.
No, that was good, Carl.
All right.
Chad, did you want to finish your thought? I apologize. That you
Yeah, it's okay. I got knocked out. I was just going to simply, I don't want to belabor this. I was going to simply say, I just think that I echo the same sentiments as Andy Toy, that it's important for those of us who may be on a different side of the color line to lend our efforts to stand up to all forms of xenophobia. And that's all we've attempted to do here at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We started in this effort back in March, where State Rep Patty Kim and I put out one of the strongest of condemnations in denouncing some of the challenges that we saw that were circulating throughout the Commonwealth. We know that Chinatown in Philadelphia is our epicenter, but State Rep Patty Kim and I wanted to just really speak to that. We followed that up with Sergeant Slayton of the PA State Police that was getting reports, but we also understood that a lot of people, because of many factors of social vulnerability, did not want to come forward and actually report what was going on. From that point on, as everyone knows, Nydia Hahn did an amazing Facebook live that about, I think, 28,000 viewers have seen it. Joe and myself and multiple others were part of that. But then once again, the challenges still continue to exist. And so of late, Andy Toy, John Chen, Kurt Young of the EEOC, the Mayor's Commission on Caribbean, African and Immigrant Affairs, Stan Straughter, Rue Landau, and others, we've pledged ourselves to come together to really kind of address this. And then for me, living in the Black body, I have to tell you, growing up in Philadelphia, I've been here for 48 years. I've always seen, not stereotyping or generalizing my community, but there have been tensions, whether it's the plexiglass in the corner stores and things of that nature. I've worked over the years with Tiffany Lawson around that. We have some historical challenges when former Mayor John Street tried to put the stadium into Chinatown. And so I think that this community, this Asian American Pacific Islander community, really needs more than platitudes, ingratiating, placating, and displaying with false generosity. Not saying anyone on this call is doing that. And we're committed at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission to be truth tellers, just like Rue is with the Philadelphia Human Relations Commission. And we saw this event, just as Carl just mapped out, from a ethnic intimidation perspective. Whatever we conclude, just know that I think that it's important for people who don't look like the Asian American Pacific Islander community to stand in solidarity with the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And we should do the same thing when it's, transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, when it's anti-Semitism. And we have, but I think that the African American community and the African American leaders in Philadelphia, more so than any time before, needs to really stand with this community. And once again, just humbled and honored to be here, and thank you for the time that was allotted to me.
Oh, thank you so much, Chad, and thank you so much, Carl, for providing that background information. I know folks were a little confused from our first community meeting, where we didn't have the benefit of your expertise and perspective. I do see that I don't believe we have any questions from the audience, and we are running a little behind. So if folks have questions, please type it into the chat box. But in the meantime, we do have Dr. Jean Wright. So Dr. Jean Wright is here from the Department of Behavioral Health, and he works in the criminal justice space. We are going to have Dr. Wright talk a little bit about that intersection between, sort of disability, which has been discussed before as a reason why it's hard to tell whether or not a crime has occurred. And so we wanted to just have Dr. Wright just provide his perspective as someone who works with the mental health court system. Dr. Wright?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. So glad to be here. I joined Chad and Carl with being humbled that you would include me in this ability to address an issue that is unfortunately very common. and that is marginalizing individuals who are different or othering people. And certainly that happens with individuals who have a behavioral health challenge. And when I say behavioral health, I'm talking about that umbrella of mental illness and substance use. And I won't use the word disorder. I will say challenge, because we're all in recovery from something. And that's the thing that I think most of us understand that are on this call. But how do we get that message out to our diverse communities? And it's easy to see the world through your lens. And I tell people a lot of times that if you can't pull your hands down from your eyes with your myopic view, sometimes it's better if you can just step back and then you can see more of the world around you. And so I would encourage individuals to really look at the fact that Philadelphia has been working many, many years to reduce the stigma that is accompanied by mental illness or behavioral health challenges. And so one of the things that Anna and I talked about offline was how do you determine whether an individual has a behavioral health challenge or not, or whether it's a crime? And so what I would say is our work with the police department, Philadelphia Police Department, is in training in CIT and doing other things, mental health first aid. And you will have other resources that you'll be able to see in terms of how the Philadelphia community comes together to reduce stigma of mental illness, reduce stigma of substance use and other things. People are in recovery, but you may not know it because they're working with you, they're in the faith community with you, they're in the grocery store with you, and they're in your family. And so we don't always try to be inclusive in our understanding of mental health challenges. Again, we will do the othering, just like people do with race, ethnicity, etc. And so what we would want to add to this conversation today is that there are resources in Philadelphia. The Department of Behavioral Health has lots of resources in terms of what individuals can do or family members can do if they suspect that their family member has a behavioral health challenge. We have a website, obviously, dbhids.org, that you can go to and look at and how to access these resources. Phone numbers. I've sent Anna a one-pager, if you will, of resources. But to the crux of Anna's question, how do you determine? None of us are walking around in the community diagnosing each other. So let's start there. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is be inclusive and understand that many of us have challenges. My challenge may not be your challenge, and your challenge may not be your neighbor's challenge, but we all have challenges. And so the whole conversation that we have started with today is how do we come together and support one another as we go through life and as we have these challenges. One thing we can guarantee, if you live long enough, and I appreciate what Andy Toy said, if you live long enough, you're going to have an opportunity to have some challenges. You know, I try to explain that to my 15-year-old son, just hang in there. Your day is coming and I'm here for you. But guess what? He's dealing with the teenage brain. And that's a whole nother conversation, Anna. What we want to do is really to embrace one another and share resources. I love what Chad said about the African American community needs to stand with the Asian and Pacific Islander community, who needs to stand with all the other communities who've been marginalized. But I want to make it a point here. That does not mean that we don't stand with predominant culture, white community. We certainly do. With the law enforcement community, I'm very proud of the work that DBH has done with our law enforcement here in Philadelphia. Do we have challenges? Are there things further to do? Absolutely. And we're working on those things. But the key point for us today is that individuals are working really, really hard to, as Andy said, not push this stuff under the rug, but stand up to it. Have to stand up for it. To paraphrase Martin Luther King, if you don't stand up for it and you just let it go, then you are a part of the problem. Obviously, he said much better than that, but you get the gist of it. And so for us at DBS, we really want to encourage you to access the resources. If you have you can make phone calls. You have phone numbers there. There's certainly trainings on the website if you're interested in mental first aid for individuals who are civilians in the community to learn how to recognize signs and symptoms of behavioral health challenges. All things are available. If there is a immediate crisis, we have phone numbers and ways for you to contact people where you can access the help for you in Philadelphia. And above all is really your concerns are our concerns. And if you don't ask the question, we'll never know how we can help. So please avail yourself of the resources and opportunities to connect. We're here for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. I mean, I think that the perspective that you bring has helps us all because I think the impression that residents left the last community meeting with was that if there is a person with a mental health disability, you just shouldn't even bother to report a crime because it's not considered a real crime. And you work with a team of law enforcement, public defenders, mental health services providers, case managers, homeless outreach, a whole team of people for over the past several years have been working to recognize that we need a solution other than just mass incarceration for people who have underlying needs that need to be met. And so I really am grateful for your participation in today's dialogue because we want members of any community to feel that they can report their crimes, but to also know that there's other alternatives for how to appropriately support suspects or people who are convicted of those crimes, and that it's not this sort of all or nothing, or a message to the community that people with mental health disabilities just can't be held accountable. And your participation and the constant work that you, social workers, and other people do to wrap around supports to people to help, get them the treatment that they need is a testament, I think, to us trying to bend that moral arc of the universe towards justice. And so I'm so grateful for your presence here. And I dropped a link in the chat box with the brochure that you gave us and handouts. And we have police Chief Inspector Cynthia Dorsey, who has joined us today. Thank you so much, Chief Inspector Dorsey. I wanted to turn it over to you to just share a message with the community about things that you would like them to know. Chief Inspector Dorsey, you are unmuted and you are, you can speak.
Good. Ready. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Oh, you have muted yourself by accident. Chief Inspector Dorsey, your phone is on mute. So if you could unmute, then we will be able to hear you. Okay.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning. I'm glad to be here. Hello, Anna. Hello, everyone. I think that what resounded with me, we've been to a few meetings, was when Chad said solidarity. And a couple of other speakers spoke about solidarity and about bringing communities together. Because I think that we have been very diligent in telling people from the Asian American Pacific community how to report crimes, how to, what to recognize in hate crimes and bias incidents, and the importance of actually reporting even anonymously. If there's a crime in progress, then you should call 911. A crime in progress means if something is happening right then and there, if you see someone being assaulted, if you see someone being harassed, if you have heard about someone being harassed or being assaulted, being the victim of a hate crime or bias incident. And from our perspective, we don't always have to know because we know people are afraid. We know people are afraid to put themselves out there. And when you speak about victims, it is very, very difficult sometimes to come forward and to actually, say, I have been the victim of a crime. Sometimes people don't know. But if you are unsure, then you should actually contact someone, contacting the police by 911 if something is happening. So a police officer or supervisor can come to your location. We know that everyone is not proficient in English. We don't expect that. So we have something that's called a language line. And a language line is when you call the police radio and you speak to a dispatcher or you're speaking to a police officer and they realize that you don't speak English, they have means where they can get a hold of interpreters. So we have, I think, over 122 different languages. And so they can determine what language you speak, get you hooked up right there, then and there, to an interpreter, or the police officer can ask for an interpreter, so that folks who are not proficient in English, and don't have anyone to interpret for them, that they can report crimes or they can report their concerns. So that's very, very important. We also have Philadelphia police officers. We have what's called the PPDAI program, where if you speak a second language, then we have to go through a program, and we are certified to actually interpret. Yeah, we don't always like to use family, but we will use family if in a pinch. But we do have ways to reach out to people. As far as the importance of reporting crimes, another thing that I have noticed is, especially when the pandemic started, we were hearing about attacks on Asian Pacific Americans, and we couldn't always find or locate these things. They were being actually put out on social media, which is a great medium. However, we don't always, even though we have our criminal intelligence units actually look at social media, we can't capture everything. So sometimes things are being reported in the community, but we don't get them. So it's very important, even if you see something on social media, that you contact the police department. You can contact me. You can also contact the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, but it has to get someplace where it can be dealt with, investigated, and stopped. The last thing I want to say, I know my 2 minutes are up, I can speak forever, is solidarity. I think, Anna and the other panelists, what we've done is we've done it the right way. First, we got law enforcement together. Then we reached out to the community about hate crimes and bias crimes and what we're doing about it, the Asian Pacific American community. I believe that if we are to deal with this thing, we need to deal with it holistically. We need to let everyone know. We need to let the Asian Pacific American community know that you're supported, that people who engage in hate behavior and engage in ethnic intimidation and harassment and bias crimes are the minority and not the majority. I believe we need to do a better job, or the next step should be, we should reach out to other segments of the community so that we attack this monster and this seriousness of it together. So that we know now, everyone knows, and you really have, it is your, I think, not right, but actually you have a buy-in, but your stakeholder. If you see something happening, if you know someone who's been the victim, that you don't stand by, you can actually report it. Third parties, we take reports from third parties as well. So I think if we connect and we unify, I think that we are stronger together. And I think that we need to bring other members of the community into the fold. We need to get this information out to them, because it is not just a problem of one segment of the community. It holds us all back. And during this pandemic and during these turbulent times, we need to be united. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chief Inspector Dorsey. And on that note, there's a wonderful discussion happening in the chat box right now. Cynthia from Modero asks, what can we do on a community level to show unity between the Asian American Pacific Islander community and the Black community? Is there anything that we can do together now to show that we are in this together? And Chad Lassiter's response was just to suggest a community forum, with the faith community of both groups and others in which we share common narratives from a strength-based perspective. And to that, we had a response from Dr. Wright saying that he would welcome this opportunity to support such a forum from a behavioral health perspective, and also how much social determinants influence much of the issues related to hate crimes and racialized trauma. And Chad's response is, a racial equity holistic approach would be phenomenal. And Randy Duque says that the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations is working with other city partners to bring Black and Asian communities together in this dialogue. The city is already planning to bring in faith leaders together. And so I'm glad that we were able to convene this discussion to really talk about how do we work towards meaningful solidarity. And in particular, Cynthia from Modero asks that if there are folks who can connect her with Black community leaders in South Philadelphia. She knows a few Indonesian pastors in South Philly who would love to be connected, so they can work on that. And her email is in the chat box. So really appreciate everyone hanging in there through all our technical difficulties. Unfortunately, a couple of our panelists who were going to present about resources for victims were not able to join the Zoom. They had problems logging in. So we will send a follow-up link so that people still get those handouts. I did drop in the chat box a Google Drive folder with the handouts to the behavioral health and other documents that have been referenced throughout today's meeting. And now we're going to start the next part of our discussion, which is how to stand up with communities in crisis. We are honored to have Congressmember Brendan Boyle join us today, Anuj Gupta, Chief of Staff for Representative Dwight Evans, Deputy Attorney General Corbett Anderson, and Councilmember Mark Squilla. So I wanted to turn this over to Congressmember Brendan Boyle, who can talk a little bit about, his connection to our community and how his office can help.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Anna. And I think I just made it in the nick of time. I'm sorry, running late. Just did a quick thing on MSNBC talking about the state of the election here in Pennsylvania. So sorry, was delayed for a little bit. There are a few things that I just want to address, and I'll, maximize time for Q&A. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Anna, for the work that you do and the advocacy work, especially recently with that awful incident that we saw. And I don't know where that incident stands in terms of the criminal justice system. Obviously, that would be at the local level. But when we see incidents that could be characterized as hate crimes, what I do and what we do in our office is immediately reported at the federal level. So that's number one. Typically, on most criminal justice matters, even though they get a lot of attention right now in the presidential election, most criminal justice matters, as we know, end up being resolved at the state or local level. More broadly, though, something that I've attempted to do, and I'm a co-sponsor of legislation that would do this, is to attempt to change the really despicable conversation that is happening out of some quarters, calling this virus the China virus or Chinese virus, linking the awful pandemic that has ravaged the United States and the rest of the world, although no country on earth worse than here, and somehow conflating that with Chinese people in China or Americans who are of Chinese descent. That's wrong. You can also do what I do, and that is I've spoken out quite forcefully where I have strong disagreements with the Chinese government, what is being done to Uyghur Muslims, the fact that the Chinese government very actively early on attempted to suppress knowledge and information about COVID-19, including, torturing that brave doctor who ultimately lost his life to COVID to come forward. But none of that has anything to do with our fellow Americans who are of Chinese descent. I myself happen to be first generation American born. My father is an immigrant. All four of my grandparents were born elsewhere. Someone who has a similar family story, but their national and ethnic origins happen to be somewhere in China, is no different from me, morally or legally. And so I think that the rhetoric, and we know where some of it's coming from, but the rhetoric right now regarding Chinese Americans, you would think that we're back in the 1880s. And it's just wrong. And it can't just be Chinese Americans speaking up. It has to be, frankly, people who look like me speaking out, saying it's wrong. It's obviously racist, but it's not just those things. It's also un-American. It is completely contrary to the idea of e pluribus unum, out of many one. So again, very happy to be with you. Also make a final plug, by the way, I represent kind of the outskirts of Chinatown, all the way up parts of North Philly, including the Northeast, where we have an active and growing Chinese American community that has been so involved in the larger community, in business, in development, in real estate. And I just really appreciate those strong relationships that I've been able to develop over the last several years.
Thank you so much, Congressmember Brendan Boyle. I think folks, who may not be aware of how the congressional districts have changed, may not realize that you represent a very large Chinese American community in the Northeast of Philadelphia. And at the same time, the ways in which that you have worked and embraced that community to kind of change how the outreach is to that community does make a difference. And so we really appreciate you spending time here today. We do have folks, Chinese American leaders, who are on this Zoom, who share information with community members through WeChat. And so it's so great that you are here to spend time and to show some solidarity with our community.
Happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we have here Anuj Gupta. He is Chief of Staff for Representative Dwight Evans, who does represent Chinatown. And so I wanted to turn it over to Anuj. And Anuj had, piggybacking on the sort of question, how do we show solidarity? Anuj had a great suggestion in the chat box. So I wanted to let Anuj speak for a bit.
Thanks, Anna. And again, you are amazing on so many different fronts for all of the work that you do throughout the Philadelphia community, not just Chinatown. So just thank you for organizing this. I actually, before I talk about that suggestion, I want to focus for a moment on where do we go from here? A lot of the discussion today has focused on the critical notions of how do you identify hate crime, how do we stand together in the moment. But at the end of the day, hate crime is rooted in ignorance. Ignorance is a simple lack of understanding. And call me naive, call me hokey, but I still fundamentally believe that when we give ourselves and other communities the chance to learn about one another, we can get to that root of ignorance, that basic misunderstanding. And I know this because I did it for years at the market. Many of the folks that are on this call, John, Andy, Carol, Councilman Squilla, you, Anna, I'm sure there's others if I go down the list. You all participated in this program. We did Breaking Bread, Breaking Barriers. We did it for 3 years. We did it in the market. We did it in communities outside of the market. And what I think we showed through that is when we give ourselves a forum, we give ourselves an opportunity to sit down and have a discussion over things that we all share in common. In this case, it was food. We oftentimes find that our commonalities are much greater and stronger than the things that divide us. And in this time, in the age of Trump, exacerbated by a virus that is keeping us all physically apart, the best that we can do is communicate with one another through these Brady Bunch screens. we are at a substantial disadvantage, big disadvantage. And so we see it's the fertilizer for hate crime. It really is. But sooner rather than later, I believe, this virus will end. And then we have to ask ourselves, what can we do to get to the root of actions that have brought this meeting and the subsequent meeting or the preceding meeting together? And so I think the AAPI community, the African American community, the Hispanic community, the Jewish community, I can go down the list. John knows we sat down with the Chinese American community, the Mexican American community, and the mummers. We brought those three together. And so we have to very purposefully engage in activity like that when the virus is over and circumstances permit us to be safe again. That, I do believe, it's a lot of work. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But that is how we will ultimately get to the root causes of actions like we saw that day. And we continue to see. I mean, that incident was not isolated. We are seeing a rise in hate crimes towards AAPIs in our area, across the country. But we can fight it, and we can win that. I really do believe that. Now, to the specific suggestion I had just made in the chat box, I just wanted to point out, we had another, I would classify it as almost a hate crime incident. We had a leader in the NAACP who posted some very anti-Semitic comments on a social media page, and the response to that was a very collaborative approach between faith-based leaders within the Black clergy and faith leaders in the Jewish community. And the result, which you may have seen last week, was the national NAACP stepping in and saying, no more, we cannot have leadership like this, and they're starting anew. I think that was a result of the concerted, coordinated action that two communities took together.
Thank you so much, Anuj. I think that's, helpful about just sort of how do we take these conversations about solidarity beyond today's Zoom, right? And how do we sort of start to work towards meaningful changes? I know that there are folks who are involved in, working with law enforcement, and we have members of law enforcement present here today who are interested, who are committed to working with members of our community to address the concerns around bias, around hate crimes, but also, being proactive and making sure that there are other resources that connect our communities. The work that Dr. Jean Wright does at the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services is a testament to that long-term effort to really wrap around the supports, to support people at whatever stage they are in the process, whether they are the victims, whether they are the suspects, or the folks who have been charged and convicted. And I know that we are running out of time, but I wanted to give Rue Landau a quick opportunity to talk about, what her agency is doing in the city. So, Rue?
Great. Thank you so much. This is once again an incredible forum, and really appreciate you pulling all of these folks together. I wanted to just, it's interesting. We at the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations, and I am absolutely sure it is the same at the Pennsylvania Commission, we receive reports of hate crimes and bias incidents every week at our office. There is a very horrific incident that just occurred in the past 24 hours. I believe Channel 6 covered it as well, and it actually touches on everybody here because it actually affected somebody at the Reading Terminal Market, and Councilman Squilla's office is the one who alerted us to it just yesterday. There are really horrific acts of threats, very, very sick anti-Black racism, homophobia, transphobia, huge rise in anti-Semitism. Obviously, we've been talking a lot about this huge rise in anti-Asian bias. happening throughout the city. I fear it is going to get worse leading up to the election. It's not going to get any better. It started immediately after Trump was elected, and if they fear they're losing ground, it will continue. So Anuj has hit the nail on the head perfectly. That what we need to do now is really pull people together some more. The community conversations are definitely hard to organize and hard to populate, and we need to do them in different ways and get into the community. But it is absolutely essential that it happens. One thing I think many of us do wrong, and I say this in myself too as a leader, we are often talking to ourselves and we're talking to leadership more than we're talking to community members. And for us, we need to get, even if I say leadership meeting, block captains and this, that, and the other thing, we need to get our message trickled down to every single person on a block, because it's probably not a block captain who is doing some terrible act of hate or bias. It's somebody in their community. And we really, really need to get the message down. So whatever we can do to get on block by block by block of the city. I'm going to say one last thing. I know most people in the city, in our sadly very segregated city, want to get to know people of different backgrounds. They absolutely do. They just need a vehicle to make it happen. So you have our pledge from the commission. You have the pledge from the Pennsylvania Commission that we're going to make it happen. We need the leadership, don't get me wrong, to help coordinate the meetings, but we've got to get the message down to every house on every single block in the city. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. And, I just want to say that's why we are so fortunate that organizations like Philadelphia Chinatown Development Corporation are doing this type of activity. Some folks look at PCDC and they say, well, they just support businesses. They don't support residents. Meanwhile, PCDC has been at the forefront of really advocating for our residents, for everyone, for a vision of equitable development that is not just, business owners or developer interests, but has worked so hard over the years to convene, different stakeholders, even people who may disagree with PCDC sometimes, right? To create a neighborhood plan, to have public input into regional planning commission meetings. All of that education is so crucial. And even within this Zoom space, there are people who have disagreed with us about, our reaction to the specific incidents that took place on July 28th. But it's our commitment to making sure that we are engaging all members of our community, not just the people who agree with us, because it's so important that we better understand different perspectives and recognize the need to, to grow, to learn, and to change. And so having folks like Dr. Jean Wright, having Chad Lassiter here, having Chief Inspector Dorsey, I think helps prevent us from oversimplifying what is a very complex historical issue. We're not going to solve all the social ills today in a Zoom meeting, but hopefully it's a launching point for us to really discuss and really invest in the solutions that we need. I know that there's discussions about how we need to reach residents. PCDC is doing this with a staff of 5, running housing programs, helping people apply for benefits, helping small business owners access small business relief with a staff of 5 people. And so I also want to just say for folks in government, to please be sensitive to what grassroots leaders are doing, often uncompensated, often doing the emotional labor of educating and confronting bias that we experience even from our own government, unfortunately. And so I wanted to give Councilmember Mark Squilla, a strong champion for our community, who is always there, to meet with our community, to have him, kind of help us wrap our arms around this discussion. Councilmember Squilla?
Well, thank you, Anna, and I want to reiterate what everybody else has said to put this meeting together. It's very informative, even for myself, to hear different perspectives from folks, and the more we educate ourselves, the better we are able to deal with these situations. And I want to thank Rue and for even yesterday's great response for when we reached out to her and her team, Randy and everybody, because it's important when you hear something, you have to say something. We have to stick up. And I heard the term over and over again of, how do we work together and how do we stand together? And I think that's the most important thing. And I think what Rue hit on and Anuj hit on is, all right, where do we go from here? How do we then get this word down to not just the electeds or people who are in high positions, but how do we get it down to the street level? How do we get it down to the people who are every day walking the streets and understanding where they can help us to resolve this? This isn't a new issue. This isn't something that just happened yesterday, and it's not something that's going to go away tomorrow. So I think our goal from this meeting, and then I know that you'll be consistent on this, is to continue the dialogue and have a meaning to be able to address this further and further, and then get it down to a level where we could see positive changes from the street level up. And it's not an easy thing for us to do, but you have police, you have the district attorney involved, you have human relations involved, we have the state, you have the federal government, you have local politics. These are ways you get things done. And I think by having people listening and learning, having people talk about who know and deal with this day in and day out, informs us so that we can make the right decisions moving forward. So I just want to thank you and PCDC, John, and the whole team for putting this together, because if anything, every time I'm on one of these calls, I learn more. And we will continue to address this. We won't stop until we get to a point where everybody's speaking up for each other and knowing that we are there to help each other and to protect each other. So thank you so much, and we'll continue to work with you and the team on this.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Squilla. We recognize that we're not the only constituents in your district who are experiencing hate right now. I just saw on social media the owner of Harriet's Bookshop, a Black female business owner, shared a screenshot of the hateful racist message that she got, threatening violence against her and her employees for simply being Black. And so, we recognize that the challenge is you have a large district, but there seems to be a theme here, an undercurrent, that there is tremendous hate that's getting inflamed right now, especially with a lot of racist rhetoric. And I know in the chat box, Hassan Freeman, he's an advocate, also asks that while, the leader of that NAACP member, what he posted was absolutely unacceptable. He wants to call attention to the fact that there is selective outrage in terms of who gets denounced or who gets held accountable. And so when we are looking at incidents of racism that African Americans face every day in the city, that it's so important for us when we're talking about solidarity to be consistent, right? To not just sort of react to certain folks when it is politically convenient or, popular. And so I really, thank everyone who has hung in there to this point.
Anna, can I just add one thing? Sure. I think what you're saying there, and I think it's very important to use these examples of people making statements as learning opportunities, as teaching opportunities, as to show people the challenges that are out there, and that we could, if we help educate people even who say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, can be brought into our side to realize those mistakes and actually help us promote these things to make this place a better place to live. So, I know the first thing you do is, let's get rid of everybody and let's everybody who said something wrong, remove them. But let's use that. If you bring them in the fold, we become stronger and more powerful, and then educate them. Sometimes they could become our best spokesperson. So, let's continue down that path and work together to make these things happen. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And, we only have a few minutes left for any questions that people might have. I know that folks are, feeling fired up and excited to kind of continue this dialogue. There's already discussion in the chat box. Dr. Jean Wright, I think you and Chad will be helping us to plan the next, community forum where we bring in faith leaders. And as, Cynthia and Rue and others have pointed out, bring in more people into this conversation that need to be a part of it. So are there any questions that folks may have? Okay, seeing none. Oh, yes, go ahead, Anuj.
Yeah, I just wonder, have there been any efforts in a broad faith-based coalition to build these relationships across API community, African American community, Jewish community. I know there's certainly efforts like that within the African American and Jewish communities.
Well,
You
John,
know,
are you aware of any efforts?
So I just saw in the chat box, Anush, that Randy 2K mentioned that there's something already in the works for a faith-based gathering.
Okay.
So I would love to connect with Randy after this meeting to learn a little bit more about that. But I think the faith-based approach is a fantastic idea. Just in Chinatown alone, there's 5 different religious institutions. And, right up the street, we just have the Rodef Shalom temple. So this is a fantastic idea. And I'd love to work with you, Chad, and Dr. Wright and others and Rue's organization just to put this together. I think this is a fantastic start. And if the religious institutions are anchors in our communities, we definitely want to start there.
Yeah, and I know that Cynthia would like to be a part of that too with the Indonesian churches. Go ahead, Anuj.
I was just going to say, just let me know. Obviously, the congressman would be supportive of that, and to the extent our office can help bring some of these coalitions together, just let me know.
And Congressmember Boyle, I know you have a lot of churches in your district. I saw you unmute. Would you like to make a comment?
I was just going to say this is an area I've actually already done a bit of work in Rodef Shalom, where I recently spoke right before the impact of COVID-19, and after the awful massacre in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, was one of the invited speakers. It was one of the largest community gatherings I think that we've had, and certainly that I've spoken at. I would also point out that we have a very diverse, in the parts of my district, at least parts of Philadelphia, I represent Northeast Philadelphia, parts of North Philadelphia, all the way down to the outskirts of Old City. We have a very diverse faith community, and that's something that I'm proud of. I've always been actively engaged with. Sometimes I think the faith community, it's probably more a criticism I have in the national media, but the faith community is painted with all one brush, and that is just completely inaccurate and divorced from the reality that we have in our city. And I think that they can play a strong and constructive role in reaching people that sometimes, frankly, those of us who are in elective office have a harder time reaching, because knowing what a divisive and partisan time in which we're living, it can be a challenge for someone who clearly has a D next to his name to reach certain segments of society. Or there are some people who are just politically unaware but are very active in their church or very active in their house of worship. And so I think it's vital that faith-based institutions play a role in this.
Absolutely. And Dr. Wright, I know the Department of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services has like an entire faith outreach. Did you want to just share a little bit?
Sure, and very proud that it's going on. I think it's past 14 years now. We're one of the few, if not the only, city this size that has a faith and spiritual affairs department in the Department of Behavioral Health. So very proud of that. I've been part of that for many, many years, and so we reach out to, as everyone has said, to the diversity of faith, and again, the point is inclusion. And point is dialogue. I love what was said earlier about, I think it was Mr. Squilla bringing in people who have made mistakes and not just throwing people away or ostracizing folks, but using it as an opportunity to learn, to teach, and then have them part of the group that says, hey, we can do better. And so to me, no one is to be thrown away. Everyone should be a part of that. And I think that's what the Faith and Spiritual Affairs Department really tries to do, is bring folks in. When we first got started 14 years ago, they had most of the meetings in churches. And when we saw that kept some people away, we said, you know what, we need to have a more neutral space. And so they started having them in more community settings in terms of that, so that everyone felt welcomed. And so those kind of little nuances that if nobody says anything, you're not going to know that you unintentionally offended someone or unintentionally ostracized someone, which was not the intent. And so it's those kind of things that I think I heard Mr. Boyle talking about in terms of let's share the information, let's come together, let's meet people where they are. And we don't have to agree on everything. We have to agree to not be disagreeable when we get together, and I think that is something that the faith community does better than people give them credit for. And so, yes, I think we have an opportunity here to really partner across all lines of communication. The community is a big one, especially in a city like Philadelphia.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I know for many of our immigrant community members, the local church is kind of where they get their social services information. And so it's also a place where we help folks understand how to navigate the systems, but to know that they're not alone. And so I wanted to give Chief Inspector Dorsey a chance to talk a little bit about how law enforcement also works with faith-based institutions. Chief Inspector Dorsey?
Yes, Anna, it just came to me. We have police chaplains. It used to be called police clergy, but police chaplain program. And what that is we have members of the faith-based communities, leaders from diverse religious churches and synagogues and all kinds of walks of life. And these leaders, these religious leaders, actually help us in the police department. They actually go out with the officers. If something happens, it doesn't have to be something that happens. But if we have an incident, they provide support. I was speaking to two of them last Wednesday. They volunteered to come down to the police headquarters, and anyone who wanted to speak to them or needed support, they would speak to the officers and civilians and anyone else. So they donate their time. So that's a program that we can have where we actually have a group of individuals from the faith-based communities already who actually do outreach. They go and do outreach with the officers to senior citizens. And so since we already have a group, a cohort of people, that would be an excellent stepping stone. And when we do complete the call, I will contact the police clergy and let them know, police chaplains, that, what we're trying to do here. And I'm sure they'll be, more than happy to join in. I think that what we're hearing about faith-based institutions, and Dr. Wright, what you said resonated with me. We need to come together. We need to bring people together, and we need to have these intense personal dialogues. And sometimes, as Anna said, we're not going to always agree. We need to hear things that are resonating in the community that stop us from being together and working together during these turbulent times. And this is the way that we're going to combat. Someone mentioned ignorance. I think Mr. Gupta, ignorance, and also fear. Fear because we don't know one another. I think personally for me, something that resonates is that at a young age, I was taken out of my African American community, and we moved into a very, very, I think we were the minorities in a Caucasian community. I went to school with diverse people, so I got to know people as people. In Philadelphia, sometimes we don't have that opportunity, and that leads to that fear and that ignorance, and then anything that people can hear, that they sometimes internalize it because they never get to know their neighbors. They never get to know people who are different from them. And so I think these dialogues, and I think the faith-based communities can really, really help us with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Inspector Dorsey. I know that, this has been a 90-minute, discussion. We had some technical bumps, but I really want to acknowledge, that you've been on this call. Detective Paul Gercio has been on this call as well. He has been working so closely with Mrs. Chen and her daughter, the survivors of, what was a pretty difficult, racially motivated attack. And so, we really appreciate that you've come into this space where the community is looking for answers, is feeling like, is there representation of us? Are there folks standing with us? And I think the gathering of today's diverse participants and this expression and commitment towards creating more opportunities. So not just having a press conference, every time there's a crime, but how do we actually work together and create opportunities where Asian Americans, members of the Black community, could actually do positive things together. I think that is something that I'm hearing, is the desire to really connect and to break down those barriers that have been put up and are only getting more intensified with today's political rhetoric. So I wanted to turn it over to John Chin to help close us out for today's gathering.
Anna, thank you so much for facilitating the conversation. I want to thank all the participants and all the speakers, especially our elected officials and the representatives of the government agencies that are here to provide protection and services to our residents. I know we're running late, so I'm just going to summarize what I think I heard today. And, this is a second in a series of further conversations about anti-hate. I think we started this because there was an anti-hate matter against a Chinatown resident who's a mom. Her daughter, 12-year-old daughter, was also a victim, and the mom was 8 months pregnant. And this started this conversation. And so what I heard today is that from different people that we all should be accountable, whether we're in law enforcement, whether we work for a government agency. We should be accountable to ensure that all our residents are protected equally under the law and protected by the agencies who are charged to protect. And we are also accountable as people, part of humanity. We're accountable to overcome ignorance and build community across all peoples. And we want our community leaders, we want our religious leaders, and we want our political leaders to be accountable and own this. We all have to own this together, because if we don't, we can't make progress. So Ann and I will meet, we'll debrief. We're going to send out meeting notes to all of you. Many of you actually expressed an interest to do further work, and we're going to call upon you to be a part of this larger project. And there seems to become a lot of support for utilizing the religious institutions to spearhead what we're trying to do here. So I want to thank all of you for spending a little over 90 minutes with us on this very, very important matter. So have a great day, have a great weekend, and please try to enjoy the 3-day weekend and take some downtime to tend to your own personal needs.